Hey, welcome back. My name's Chad Kennedy, and this is my YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it. In this series, I've been making a Ngombe Ngulu, which is a wicked hook-shaped sword out of Damascus. Now, I've finished forging the sword to shape, and it's on to the rough grinding now. Now, I'm not going to show you just a ton of grinding. What I start off doing is profiling the blade. That's going to be one of the main things I do in grinding. The other thing is going to be taking some of the weight off. It's still pretty thick at this point. I need the sword to be pretty light because it's a lot of steel. After I get my rough grinding done, I'm going to move on and get this thing ready to quench, which means that I need to get the tang shaped, the shoulders filed for the guard, and my name stamped on it. Now this sword wouldn't fit in my jig, so I kind of just used the outside of my jig to line up my stamp. Now the next step is the hardest step of the entire build, and that is quenching the blade. It's obviously way too big to get the whole thing in my forge at once or in my tempering oven. So what I've done is put the first 18 inches inside my forge, and the hook is sticking out of my forge. I'm using a rosebud torch to heat it up. You definitely don't want to heat one side up and not the other. So you'll see me switch back and forth from one side to the other side because it'll definitely bow if you just heat one side. That's with any kind of steel. Now that I've got the entire blade up to heat, I'm just making sure that it's all an even heat over the whole blade. And you'll see as I start to pull it out, there's some hotter spots in it, but this is about the best that I can do. So as I'm trying to get my tongs off it cools down a little bit, but I get it in the quench. After I get it out of the quench, I can tell that I've got a good hard blade. One thing I had to do for this sword is find an industrial sized oven to cook it in, because my tempering oven is not wide enough. It's plenty long, but definitely not wide enough for the sword. Now one thing that I'm doing on this sword is that I am softening the spine, which is something I did on the sword that I built for Forged in Fire. Obviously they were putting it through some brutal tests, so I wanted to make sure that this thing was not going to crack on me. So you can see my sweet setup here is just a barrel that I split in half and filled with water, and then I'm just holding the cutting edge down in the water as I heat the spine up. The trickiest thing about all of this is that you have so many different angles to try to get the spine softened while keeping the edge cool. So I have to do a lot of moving around, be very patient, just heat little sections at a time and make sure that I keep the cutting edge cool the entire time. Once I finish that up, I'm going to move on to all my finishing grinding, which basically just consists of taking out all the scratches. Most of the heavy work is already done. I'm not trying to really remove any metal at this point, but just take those deep scratches out so when I etch this thing, those scratches don't become even deeper. One problem that I have to correct is that I had a slack bow in the blade. Now you can see here I've cranked on this thing in my straightening jig pretty hard to just get that little bit of a bow out of it. It wasn't that bad, but to me it needed to be perfectly straight. So it's on to the handle. I've got a piece of unstabilized koa here that I'm using for the main part of the handle. And one thing that I like to do before I start drilling is make sure that that block is completely square, and that way you know that you're drilling right down the center of it. So I also use a level to make sure that it's running with the drill press. Another thing I do is draw the tang out on the handle, and that makes finding the angle of the tang a lot easier. You can line up your drill bit with that line you've drawn and then just move back to the center of the block, and you're going to drill right where your tang needs to go. Now this handle construction is a little more complicated than most of the handles that I do on my knives. It's got the handle that we're working on here, and then it's got a guard. That's really not much of a guard, but it's also got two globes at the end of the handle that keep your hand from sliding off the handle, and then a pommel nut. Being as how this is a little more complicated construction, I'm going to tackle all that in the next video. If you have any comments or any questions, leave it in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. I'd really appreciate y'all subscribing, and also check out my Facebook and my Instagram for what I'm doing right now. Again, thanks for watching.